This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. One of the fondest memories I have from childhood was going through my grandmother's cedar chest. I don't know how many of you guys remember cedar chests, but my grandmother had two of them. She had one that was at the foot of her bed, and she had another that was stored away in the attic of her home. And it was intriguing to me. I felt like I was on a treasure hunt every time I went through these things. And it's not like I hadn't seen this stuff before, but every time you open up the lid on this thing, it was almost magical because it transported you back into time. Quilts, keepsakes, pressed flowers, and of course images. Those images that have remained with me for years and years of ancestors long since dead, people that had served in the First World War. I even had an uncle in there that was in the Spanish-American War. And all of it made me feel like I was part of something. But you know, every now and then, there are cases that rise to the surface that really give you a chill. They give you a chill in the sense that they frame out a life. A life, is, in this case, that was cut short, very short. I'm going to talk about a 12-year-old boy that had been missing, now get this, for 4 years. And then just by accident almost, a maintenance worker found his body in an attic in Buffalo, New York. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, you know, buddy, when today we're talking about a child, Jaylin Griffin, who, you know, was 12 years old. And we have to think about, you know, you and I, we discuss family and life and all those sorts of things. Where were we when we were 12 years old? Well, and what's really particularly heartbreaking is that there was no way to really identify him when they initially found the body. And that was the position that the police and certainly by extension the medical examiner found themselves in this particular case.
Well, that's what, when you think about remains being recovered, if it was you or me, we would have a lifetime of x-rays, dental stuff. I mean, all of that would be on record. But we got a 12-year-old here without that. I wonder sometimes when they said they used dental records to identify how different it is for every child growing up. Some children still have baby teeth at 12.
Oh, yeah.
While others lost them all when they were 8 or 9, 10, whatever, you know?
And then, you know, you see these little clips throughout the years about, you know, some of the royals over the years that's been in these families with this genetic mix. There was one child, I think, that was born with a full set of adult teeth, which to me is so creepy. Or if you see images of people that have 2 sets of teeth, have you ever seen those images? It's absolutely horrible.
Okay.
But there
when
are
you
anomalies.
Get stuck on YouTube stuff that lasts for hours, it's when you see a picture like that and it shows somebody's mouth and they got like teeth coming out of their palate, you know?
Yeah. It's certainly, but yet the upside of that is that just like with a standard dental identification, but you know, that's a unique situation to find yourself in, because with teeth, we're all unique. And I think that people think that even if you get braces, you're going to blend in with everybody else. And maybe to a certain degree, there are adjustments that occur. But we're all unique when it comes to our teeth. It's almost like a fingerprint to a certain degree. In the case of Jaylin, when you think about his teeth, you have to look back at his life, not what you have before you as a deceased 12-year-old boy. You have to think about, well, what occurred in his life? And when investigators go to dig into his past, and I'm talking about from a medical dental perspective, because they're going to have to get this child ID'd, remember, and let this really sink in, 12-year-olds don't walk around with a driver's license in their back pocket, which, by the way, is actually one of the most unreliable sources of identification. I don't trust them. I've been burned before. In the case of Jaylin, though, you would have to go to, and I would assume that they had done this, you'd have to go to a local dentist, try to determine if there are any peripheral. Remember, his mom's gone. We don't know how much involvement his father had in his life, but peripherals, aunts, cousins, did Jaden ever go to a dentist?
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, what we would do is that many times it doesn't even require a subpoena. Many times the dentist will say, when you tell them that you suspect that one of their patients is now deceased, I don't know about you and your dentist, but you develop kind of a relationship with these people. They're digging around your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to be really careful when I was talking to dentists and physicians at any time in my career, because you don't just walk in and say, hey, we think your patient is dead. It's cruel. It's cruel to the practitioner. So, but back to my original point, if you have a dentist out there, they want to get on board. They want to help you get this body identified if it is, in fact, their patient. So they would have retrieved, first off, the x-rays, the Panaflex, like they put you in that thing and it rotates around your head.
Yeah.
We actually use skull x-rays as well, because I don't know, people might not know this, but did you know our sinuses have very distinctive patterns?
No.
And so we can use the sinuses in order to arrive at a conclusion.
But Joe,
and also, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got 12, you've got remains. We're starting with bones. We're not starting with a child. We're starting with bones. The remains are found 5 miles from where he lived.
Right.
And the only thing we've been told is that the remains had been there for some time.
Yes.
And we don't know. You're starting from zero. Yes. I mean, they have kind of an idea. Well, we know we had a child that went missing 4 years ago.
Right.
I mean, what if you didn't have that? What if you didn't have that part of the story? How do you start to identify the remains? How do you even begin?
Excellent point. You have this pinpoint out there where you look back and you go to the first place you really start is you go to the missing persons section at the police department and say, do you guys have anybody on your list that might fit this description? And I know what you're going to say. What, description of a skeleton? No, that's not necessarily what I'm saying, because even at the scene, we can kind of begin to do an assessment of the body to try to determine stature, any kind of items that they may have had with them, because that's going to give you kind of an insight. Yeah, the clothing itself. When you, like, for instance, with a small child, all you got to do is look at the labels, if the labels still exist. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, believe it or not, labels are actually very resilient. They're made out of different material than, say, if you have like a cotton shirt on. They'll last when other things are falling apart. Again, my experience doesn't necessarily mean that that's everybody's experience. But you look at sizes. Now, when I was a little boy, I had to go to the Husky section. I don't know if you remember the Husky section in stores.
Yeah, but that was the polite way of saying your kid's fat.
Yeah, my brother. I had to go to the. I had to go to the Husky. I had to go to the Husky section, but
I thought Husky was a brand. Actually,
I know. Actually, I think it is, but not in this sense. So you have to go back and look at clothing labels, and once you've kind of assessed that, and not say that there's not adults out there that wear children's clothing, because there are. My wife has a friend of hers that is still the same size as she was in high school, and she wears a 1. If you can imagine that. Sometimes she'll go with a 2, but she might have to get it taken in. And when you see her sometimes, and she's a grown woman, I mean, obviously she's, she looks like a small child at a distance, but she's not. Wow. So you can't just assume anything. But that's the basis of science, right? You have to jump over these little barriers along the way, or jump through the hoops to do kind of this exclusionary methodology where you're ticking boxes. Who could this fit? And once that assessment is done at the scene, the body is very, very carefully removed from the scene, because here's the problem you run into. With a body that has been down this long, it's very easy to lose parts. And when I say that, like, we're assuming that there's skeletal remains. Well, that doesn't mean that the skeleton is still completely attached to all of the other associated structures. So you can actually lose, when you think about how complex the hand is, just the hand alone is, first off, it's a miracle. Right. When you see it, the feet, oh my gosh, it's so complex from a skeletal standpoint. So you want to be able to collect everything. And when we get a body like this back to the morgue, first off, the clothing is all assessed. You do the photography and all of this before you ever remove the clothing. And you lay the body out based upon the skeletal remains that you have in its classic anatomical position. And that way you can appreciate everything once the clothing is removed and all of that sort of thing. And you would take photographs of the body. But when it comes to the teeth, because you got two goals here. First off, and these are actually part of the medical legal mandate, we have to determine cause of death, assign a manner of death, and then people always forget about the third portion of our mandate, and that is to get a body identified. That's our top three things that we do. So this is right up there with saying, yeah, they were killed by such and such method. Identification is everything, because if you can pull the thread on identification and find out who this person is, you begin to learn a lot about their social history and their interactions with people. If you're just walking around blindly not knowing who they are, you don't know who they were in contact with. But when you get that piece, that identification piece, the investigation will many times will be supercharged at that point, because now you can go out to all the peripherals that have been in that individual's life. And certainly with Jaylin, he's 12 years old.
Right.
So you have to do this dental assessment, and you would call in an odontologist. Most people think about bite marking. You got to, I think we've mentioned this before, but bite mark is not what it used to be. As a matter of fact, some courts don't even recognize it anymore. But odontologists play a key role when you have mass fatalities, you have unidentified bodies, to get these bodies identified. And that's what they would have done. You get that chart of the suspected person that fits that demographic, the metrics involved in this particular body, and you can narrow it down by looking through the missing persons reports that have been filed. There's not going to be that many 12-year-olds. I mean, they're there.
Right.
It's not going to be like an adult that just wanders off. Okay.
With dealing with a child's skeletal
mm-hmm.
remains,
mm-hmm.
are they obviously different than the remains of a short adult?
Yes. Yeah.
So you would know.
And here's why. I can tell you right from Jump Street, one of the first things you look at that differentiates adult skeleton, even a tiny adult, are wear patterns on the bones.
Wear patterns?
And, yeah, like how much life has been lived. Because when you look at joints in particular, you think about those, and then we have the growth plates as well.
That's what I was going to ask you, because the growth plates.
The epiphyseal plates, that you have in the knees and all these, when we get growing pains. And,
is that a real thing, or is that something we made up?
No. That's
children really can have growing pains.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't matter how much baby aspirin you throw at it; it's still going to hurt.
I got to admit something.
I know
right
a lot of people that would agree with that. My kids, my son would howl in pain many times.
I have to admit that I thought that was bogus.
No, it's real.
Yeah, but I hid it. I didn't deny it. But when LaDonna would say that about Hannah in particular, she just having growing pains, and I would, in my head, I'm going, come on, man.
Yeah,
give me Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck first, okay? Because this is Looney Tunes.
It's truly a real thing.
Oh my!
And no, it's not a television show from the 80s. It's actually,
when you pray for forgiveness of your thoughts. Boy, that's one right there, because I really did think that was just nothing. I thought it was made up.
Wow. It's very real, and the bone is adjusting. Everything, all the attachments are adjusting too, and so that's a real thing.
I am so thankful I didn't say it out loud. Oh my gosh, Joe!
But you look for patterns like that, and this extends to the teeth as well. And when I teach at Jacksonville State, I teach a whole section on human identification, and I start off by, particularly when we're covering forensic odontology, I tell my kids in class, take your tongue right now and run it all along your teeth, and tell me if you can determine what is your dominant side of your mouth where you chew, based upon what you're sensing with your tongue. Now, these kids that I teach, many of them are 18, 19, 20, they're not going to have a lot of wear, but some people do. Like in my mouth, at this stage in my life, it is very distinctive. I know everybody in the audience right now is running their tongue over their teeth,
and I know exactly what's going on. I'm like,
yeah, but you can actually there's a sharpness to these teeth that have not been worn down,
right?
And that's a big indicator. When you see teeth that have a wear pattern, you're going to know that this person has lived a life because they've been chewing on a dominant side. You can also get these little pathologic manifestations in the teeth as well that come along with age. But with a child, let's kind of draw the line here. With a child, when we talk about people, there's a couple of terms here. You've got baby teeth. We've all heard that term, but old timers used to include my grandmother's generation would call them milk teeth. But the true scientific term is deciduous teeth. And so deciduous means it's kind of a non-permanent. You have deciduous boulders. If you remember the movie Tremors, they talk about the deciduous boulders in there, and everybody laughed, but that's a real thing. And it means that these are kind of sitting on the surface, okay? They're just there. And so after a period of time, they easily come out. I think that everybody can identify with the idea of how it felt to pull a tooth.
Right.
You're scared at first, but then you kind of look forward to it, not to mention there might be money involved. With deciduous teeth, baby teeth, they're very rounded, but they're not worn, okay?
Right.
But with adult teeth, generally they're going to have sharper edges, and also there might be a chance that you could see restorations. Maybe you've had a cavity.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you've cracked a tooth. I've got a cracked tooth right now, and I can tell you how I cracked it. I still remember to this day. I was in the French Quarter, and we went to the Acme Oyster House, and there was a whole group of us, and we were drinking beer, and we ordered, and they had a special on raw oysters. And Dave, we must have had, I don't know, probably 6 trays of oysters. And I happened to grab an oyster that had a pearl in it, and I bit into it. And it's my lower bicuspid, my number one lower bicuspid that has this. It's the one that has 2 points on it. You have the canine that we call them wolf teeth, dog teeth, that's got the points on them. It's one of my bicuspids, and I chipped it. And buddy, let me tell you something. I think I screamed like a 8-year-old girl. It hurt so bad, but it didn't crack it down
right.
vertically. It just chipped it off, but it was very painful. And I had that pearl for a while, and we were I remember distinctly talking to the other people in the restaurant, the wait staff, and they said, yes, this happens. It does it's a real thing. Plus, I'd had a few Dixie beers at that point in time, so I don't know if my judgment was the best.
Wow.
I had little or no awareness. That's what happens in alcohol. I did chip a tooth with that. So that's unique to me, though. And any restorations, any missing teeth are unique. In Jaylen's case, you have to wonder, were all of his teeth erupted? And remember, there's actually, he's 12, so there's actually a tooth that is associated with the number 12. It's a 12-year molar. And even though they say 12-year, that's not static, okay? Right. It doesn't mean that, yes, this definitely in the 12th year of life, that tooth is going to erupt and it's written in stone. It doesn't.
Right.
Those are parameters that you put on it.
Yeah.
So did he still have deciduous teeth, or had all of his adult teeth come in at that moment in time? So that's what they would have had to have worked with. And obviously in this case, because they did get Jaylin Griffin identified through dental records, we know that they had to acquire his antemortem dental records. They would have done x-rays. They would have had a dentist come in and chart the teeth. And then if they were so inclined, they could, I don't think they did in this case, but they could bore down into the tooth, particularly into the pulp, and retrieve enough sample in there to do DNA. I don't think that was necessary here, because you got a 12-year-old, we've got a 12-year-old missing, you got what appears to be,
because they would have started there. They had all the flyers and everything. It was a well-known case in that area, and even though it was 3.5 years later, there was enough public awareness to at least begin there. They didn't have to start from zero and try to figure out everything. They actually were like, well, it very well could be the child that was missing 3.5 years ago. Let's start there.
Yes.
And so that actually aided in being able to identify him, but they did it with dental records.
Yes, and they did. And thank God they did. Look, I'm happy that he went to a dentist at some point in time. I'm happy that they were able to do this. You know me and the word closure. I don't like that word. I think it's a BS term. because you're dismissing people's grief by saying
it's never over.
No, it's never over. But in this case, we do know this. A 12-year-old was found dead in an attic, all alone. Jaylin Griffin, 12 years old, Buffalo, New York. Just simply by its nature, Buffalo is a tough environment. You have to be rather resilient to live there to begin with. I've had friends that have occupied that space up there, have lived there, love it. They're huge Buffalo Bills fans. But the one thing that always comes back to my memory, Dave, when I think about my friends from Buffalo, is that image of these people in the parking lot at the Bills games where they're diving onto these plastic tables with no shirts on in the dead of winter. And we're not talking about some kind of mild winter. We're talking about bone chilling cold. And that's the world that they live. They choose to live there. Right. They choose to be in that environment. And it's lovely. It is a lovely place in the summertime. You've got lush greenery that's everywhere. But, buddy, those winters are harsh up there. And I think about Jaylin, 12 years old, and he had grown up in that environment. I bet you dollars to donuts he was probably a Bills fan, more than likely. When I was 12, I was a Saints fan and still remain a Saints fan.
Bless your heart.
So, yeah, I grew up in that age of putting bags over our heads and going to the Superdome. But this child, he's not a child that's grown up with a silver spoon in his mouth. And this place that he is eventually found, when I'm hearing a lot of reports about it. And Dave, it's disturbing to me. I mean, it really is. This house is managed by a management company that specializes in halfway houses. Now, halfway houses can mean a lot of things. It can be ex-cons. I think that's normally what we think about, where they're kind of transitioning back into life. You can have individuals that are living in these dwellings that have substance abuse problems. But, when you see this house, and I urge anybody to go take a look at it, you can see it. It looks like it was probably a really beautiful place at one time. It's kind of a Victorian style home that's got, one of these big peaks on it and that sort of thing. And the peak up at the very top is the attic, and it's one single little window. And, I stared at it for a long time thinking that child had been up there for that protracted period of time. How was he placed up there? Because I have to imagine he was placed. I guess, you could opine that perhaps he went up there and died. I don't know. I'm not buying that, though, as an investigator. But it's a very creepy looking place now. And it's broken down into like these modules where you've got separate living spaces in this gigantic house. And, dude, as you know, you never know who's going to come and go. And it's not just the people that are occupying space. It's individuals that those people have connection with outside of the folks that live there. We're talking about family members. We're talking about maybe people that have been involved in crimes in the past that are associated with the residents, people that have substance abuse problems that are visiting friends that are there.
There are so many different things that it could be, and 80% of them are not good. That's why these places tend to take up areas because you've got a big house. Usually it's in a rundown area. They can sublet it, or not sublet, but they can subdivide it so that they can get more people per room and place them there. That's how companies make money. Just getting down and dirty. The area that we're talking about is historically a beautiful area. Been there for a long time. Buffalo has a lot of history. But after Jaylin Griffin went missing, Joe, they had his picture up on billboards. They had they had flyers. They did all the normal things that you do when a child goes missing. They promised rewards for information. This child went missing at the age of 12. His remains are found 3.5 years later. They hold a candlelight vigil to celebrate what would have been his 16th birthday. And what happens? Gunfire. Just letting you know.
It's mind-blowing and mind-bending. This child and by the way, his brother had also died of a firearms injury.
3 months later. Yeah,
3 months after he was last seen alive. It's a very disturbing kind of through line with this. And, I got to tell you, I was completely unaware of the shooting that took place at the vigil. sometimes you work cases and you cover things like this, and there are these little exclamation points you find along the way. And I don't know if there's anything to them necessarily, but I don't necessarily believe in coincidence in this world. And I'm really interested in, first off, who would do that?
Right.
Who would be that disrespectful during the course of something where you've got family and friends that are mourning and remembering? Who would do that? Yep. I think that's a big question. Now, whether or not that has any bearing on Jaylen's disappearance, I have no idea, but I do know this. I think that this is a fertile field for perhaps harm to have come to this child.
Right.
And also, we have to think about, going back to the structure itself, who had opportunity, access, knowledge of this dwelling. Because you know and I know that anytime someone buys an old home like this, it's never going to be the original inside. It will be chopped up, cut up. There will be false walls that have been placed up to create more space. And when you think about how would an individual know that would place a body inside of this dwelling, how would they know how to navigate this environment? It's not like you're going to walk in off the street and say, hey, I got a dead body, a 12-year-old boy. Let's see. I think I'll choose this house, and maybe or maybe not it has an attic. I don't know. I'm going to run the risk of carrying his remains up there and depositing them in the attic, because I'm going to have to pass by people in order to get up the staircase. Now, maybe the occupants in the house were to the point where I don't see nothing. I don't want to talk about nothing. You go on, you do you, I'll do me, that kind of attitude where they don't get involved. I have no idea. And again, that's one of the problems that the police are facing. We're talking 3.5 to 4 years downrange from when he was last seen alive. How are you going to go back out and find the people that were living there?
Take Sergeant Schultz out of the equation for just a minute, and depending on what kind of a halfway house, running people in and out of there, they had to have somebody that was managing the facility, somebody that was living there as the caretaker, because you don't just put people in, whether it's recovery, second chance, transition from, what every halfway house has somebody in charge.
I saw an interview with an interested party. I'll put it to you this way.
Okay.
They stated that they had been begging for this place to be torn down.
Right.
Because so much evil was occurring. By their estimation, at this location, there were people that were, cars pulling up all the time, different cars, people going in and out, all of this sort of thing. And can you imagine trying to raise a family in this area on the street? And you've got this kind of activity specifically at this house. I don't know, Dave. It's certainly not compatible with what you would think about creating a community in this particular environment to keep it safe for children.
It's problematic when you look at it, Joe. When you've got a place like this, and there's we said this a little bit ago, the chief of police said the remains had been there for some time. The maintenance worker said there was no odor to the remains that he found. Now, sometime between the time that the remains were brought there, and according to the chief of police, they had been there for some time.
Yes.
Which leads me to believe that when the body was placed up there, it was a body. It wasn't just the skeletal remains of a body. So you've got people going in and out of this house, a lot of people, a lot of contact with the police, a lot of people with no vested interest in covering up anything. Nobody smelled anything? The decomposition of a body and nobody smelled anything?
Yeah. Cases are coming to mind for me right now, as you say that, Dave. And I think probably the case that jumps to mind the quickest for me is probably Harmony Montgomery. When that little angel was missing for months upon months, actually years. No one had seen her. No one knew where she was. But all along, you've got this monster that was transporting her back and forth in a bag and placing her in air vents, in freezers, coolers, in the trunk of a car, and no one ever noticed. I wonder if there are any other similarities in the case involving Jaylin Griffin. many positives I can come away with from the case of Jaylin Griffin, particularly at this point. But if there is one point that I think might be positive from a forensic standpoint, I'll use one word to sum it up, Dave, and that is containment. Containment. And that's a very important point here from the perspective of forensics. And you've got a young man whose remains are found literally inside of a dwelling where it's occupied. This is not like what some people refer to as like an abandoned home that's a shooting gallery where you've got junkies coming in and out. It's not a burned out space where no one would dare go near it. You're talking about a structure that housed fellow human beings in this environment. And I think that there are probably a lot more questions here than there are actually answers.
Well, Joe, in my other life, I serve in a lot of different ministerial capacities with recovery, second chances, transitioning from prison into the regular world again. It's not an easy transition. I'm not going to lay any kind of guilt trip on anybody about what happens. Accepting responsibility for the situations of our life is the first step on the road to recovery. Right. But in this particular case, I'm glad you mentioned that the house was not. When I first heard the story, I assumed that it was going to be a home that was abandoned, that wasn't being used, and the remains were just found by somebody who was there to clean it up so they could put it on the market or demolish it. That's what I thought. But when we found out it was a maintenance worker, that this is an active address and has been, I wanted to share something with you that was being reported by local news there, WIVB4, said the address where 12-year-old Jaylin Griffin's body was found had been the subject of numerous complaints over the years. His body wasn't the first to be found there either. 911 logs revealed a troubled past for the address at 107 Sheffield Avenue in South Buffalo. More than 160 complaints have been made to the police since 2007, including domestic violence, fire, and mental health calls, and the discovery of bodies, plural. According to Buffalo Police, a welfare check in June 2020. Now, this is before Jaylin Griffin went missing. June 2020 turned up a body at the multi-unit house. That's a polite way of saying it's a really beautiful, it would qualify as a mansion if new, but now we have divided it up and created 4 apartments inside this building. September 2022, call resulted in an arrest. They're still trying to get more information, this local television station is, to find out, if a body was actually discovered from that call as well, because it appears there might have been. A year after that, August 2023, a body was found in the yard. Again, you've got police crews fire crews at this residence, Joe, during the time that Jaylin Griffin was missing. Again, not suggesting for a minute that he has been there the entire time.
Right.
But the chief of police said the remains had been there for some time. So I'm wondering, will they be able to determine, based on the condition of the remains, if Jaylin died shortly after he was last seen, or if he died in the recent past, a year ago?
Wow. Very difficult. Very, very difficult. Let me kind of paint a picture to you what you're going to find with these remains based upon my experience. When you have bodies, remember I used the term containment just a moment ago, and that's important to keep in mind. Traditionally, let's think about this. The hottest part of a house is the attic, right? Because, when we were in middle school, junior high, taking physical science, the one principle that we learned about heat is that it rises. And if you have...
It's also something you learn when you become a dad and you're looking for some place you can put stuff that's out of the way where your children can't get into it. And you open up that crawl space, and occasionally you're scared by a squirrel or a bat, right. But you're always hit by the stalest, hottest breeze there is in the history of mankind.
It is absolutely horrible. And I've had to work in an attic in an old home that I had, and it was necessary work. It had to be done because we had a leak, and I really thought I was going to die. And of course, that's in the deep South, and it was during the summertime, so shame on me. But I can tell you this, it's also, if it's free of leaks, it's also one of the drier spaces in the house. And this is why, because anything, if it's free of leaks and you don't have water that's actually coming in through any of the vents, how they'll have the vents up in the attic. If you don't have any water getting in there, then I'm not going to say that it's completely free of any kind of humidity, because we know that that's not the case. But it is an environment where bodies can have an opportunity to literally naturally mummify. And that's something that doesn't occur with great frequency, but you do see it, particularly in drier, hot areas. And we could talk all about mummies and all that sort of thing, but bodies do, in fact, and I'm talking about Egyptian mummies, or even, some of the mummies that have been found, which are in marvelous condition down in South America at those very high altitudes where the ritual burials that they have there, almost perfectly preserved. That's the one saving grace up there, though, because even though a body is in fact mummified, and we don't know if Jaylen's is or not, however, the opportunity is it exists when compared to what would have happened if his remains had been found in the basement of the home, that wet, damp area. It promotes decomposition in that area. So you're not going to have this preservation of skin, perhaps. And I've seen bodies that have been down for 4-5 years before, and you still have what would have previously been referred to as soft tissue. Of course, it's no longer soft tissue. It has a leather-like appearance to it. And the reason is that the air is so dry that it's sapping all the moisture out of the skin, and the body will literally dry out. Another added bonus here is if his body was, first off, still clothed, that adds another layer of protection. And this gets kind of sinister, but if his body was cocooned in anything, like a blanket, plastic, or was it just laid out on the floor? And to that point, here's something I'd like to address as well. Considering the potential population that was moving in and out of this environment, and let's just say that you've got people that are drug users and they want to try to keep their drug usage hidden. What better spot than to go into the attic if you're going to partake in any kind of drugs and you want it to be hidden? That would be a perfect spot to go to. Is that possible? When they searched that area up there, did they find any evidence of people moving around in that space? Because the one thing you get in attic spaces that no one has been into, if there's dust deposition on the floor, you can see handprints, you can see footprints, shoe prints, you can see all kinds of things that have been left behind for years and years because you don't have a direct wind blowing over it. And I think another part to this also, if Jaylin has been traumatized in any way, were they able to blast light into that area, assuming that it doesn't already have some kind of light source up there, and appreciate any kind of dried biological evidence, like blood, for instance, that might be there? It's going to take a very keen eye in that environment to process it. And it's a difficult environment for crime scene individuals to have to work in. If you consider the space, the access space, you talked about getting into the small space that you had to go into attics that you've had. Now, I've been in homes that have the pull downs, makes the weird spring noise.
Oh, yeah.
When you pull it down. Everybody's experienced that. But I've also been in older homes that actually have a door access. Mm-hmm. Where it's a full-size door and you turn the knob and you pull it. My wife always tells the story of her grandmother's house. Her grandmother had a really old house with a big attic, and she was terrified because it had a little door that led to the attic, and you had to kneel down to get into it, and she always imagined like monsters coming out of it. So she's still to this day terrified of little doors, But I think about that, and I think about, well, can the crime scene techs get in there with the equipment that they have? Are they going to be able to appropriately assess it? And then beyond that, when Jaylen's remains are removed from that environment and they're taken to the medical examiner's office, what are they going to be able to appreciate there? Well, if he still has any semblance of soft tissue, we'll just call it that, even if it's dried and mummified, will they be able to appreciate any kind of trauma And one of the things I'm thinking about are ligature marks on the neck, perhaps. One of my big concerns with this child is that he may have been sexually assaulted, because I can't imagine for what purpose would you kill a 12-year-old other than some kind of raging sexual desire that you might have. You have some kind of proclivity that runs in that direction, perhaps a perpetrator. That assessment is going to be very difficult to make, I think, because of the time. And we're not just talking about a rape kid here. We're talking about any kind of trauma that he may have, physical trauma that he may have sustained, around his buttocks. I think that would be very difficult. But if his clothing is still there, here's the cool thing. You might have transfer evidence that would still be there. And the one thing I'm thinking about right now, was there any hair transfer? Because the hair is going to be very resilient if it's attached to clothing. Was there anything around his body that would give you indication of activity? Was he lured into the attic with the promise of maybe candy or food? Are there food containers up there? Are there bottles that were left behind? Maybe some adult tried to tempt him with alcohol and said, hey, you want to drink a beer? I've got beer. You can come up here. I've got a great space. Bring you and your puppy up here. So as an investigator, you have to think about all of these possibilities. But how this case, I think, could eventually be explained and resolved is the police are going to have to do their due diligence of digging into the past of who occupied those spaces. Can you track them down? Can you bring them in and ask them very direct questions about that period of time when this young child went missing? Because therein are going to rest all of your answers. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.